Good morning. We'll call the Committee of the Whole meeting to order for November 8th, 2023. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Barnes.
Present.
Mrs. Burdick. Here. Mr. Curran. Mr. Sear. Mr. Demick.
Here.
Mr. Fanton.
Here.
Mrs. Hanchett. Here. Mr. Harris.
Here.
Mr. Havey.
Here.
Mr. Healy. Mr. Rickey.
Here.
Mrs. Ricketts Swales. Here. Mrs. Root. Here. Mr. Rumfelt.
Here.
Mr. Stacken.
Here.
12 present, 3 absent.
Thank you, ma'am. Before we get started, we have to recognize former legislator and current chair of the Allegheny County Industrial Development Agency, Judy. Welcome. Long time no see. Director Craig Clark is here as well. I think you ladies from Quinine probably know everybody else in the room. Nearly the entirety of this meeting today is to receive a presentation from Quinine Associates, who have been working on developing a proposed strategic plan for economic development. So we're just going to jump right into it. I don't know who's going first, but I do want to welcome Alex Tranmer and Krista Franzi from Quinine. And the floor is yours. Welcome.
On the screen. Thank you. It is lovely to be here with you this morning. As the chairman mentioned, my colleague and myself have been working with the county for several months now, and what we want to do today is a couple of things. We've got 2 hours, so we're going to work through this in a couple different parts. Before we jump right into the strategy, we want to give a little bit of context, a little bit of background, really understand how we got to the point that we are now, get some feedback, have a conversation. We'll be presenting up here, but please, at any point, please feel free to ask questions and stop us, and we can certainly have a conversation. I'm going to use these slides just to help us advance the conversation. And do we need to take out? Oh, there we go. Okay, so again, just a little bit of what we are looking at today. We want to talk a little bit about economic development today in rural communities. There have been a lot of shifts, even in the last 20 years, in terms of really what economic development means to counties, to municipalities. And so we want to take a second and talk a little bit through that. We'll talk about the draft strategy, goals, and initiatives. And so that's what we've worked with our steering committee with over the last several weeks and months, really putting together a roadmap for the county in their economic development. We want to share some lessons that we've learned from across New York State. I'll give a little bit of background on the firm that we're with just in a second here, because we do work all over the state, all over the country, and we've worked in different counties, and we really want to look at lessons learned and what's worked. And obviously there's going to be a unique path forward for Allegheny County, but we do want to see what has worked in other locations. So again, just by way of introduction, I am the Director of Strategic Planning with Quinine Associates. We are a full-service economic development firm based in Saratoga Springs, and so that is where Krista and I are in from today. Like I mentioned, we work all over the country. We were founded in upstate New York, though, in the Adirondacks, and so we really love working in our backyard all across the state. And Krista Franzi, who is vice president and a partner at the firm, she is here with me today, and she'll present in a little bit on some other topics. So when I say full service economic development firm, I mean that we do everything from strategic plans like we're talking about today, to real estate market analysis, housing assessments, grant administration, grant writing. So we really understand all of the components that go into the holistic sphere of economic development. And so that really helps us understand all the different component parts that we look at in strategic plans. So when we set out to do this strategic plan, there are just a few objectives that we want to point out that, the process really revolved around. There's lots of different ways to do strategic planning. There's lots of different, deliverables that you could have at the end of a strategic plan, but a few things that we focus on. So one being the data analysis, right? We want to make sure that our decisions are informed by what's actually happening on the ground, and to do that, we do quite a bit of data analysis. So looking at what's happened historically, where we are today, and then where we're going. So that really helps build the foundation. Now, data can only take us so far, especially in rural communities, right? There tend to be some gaps that we know we need to fill with lots of stakeholder engagement. And so that picture on the right there, that's from our last trip down in the Wellsville area, and we did a tour all around the county that we'll talk about, but we had meetings with businesses all across the county, one-on-one interviews with county leadership and other businesses, service providers that work regionally. So we really are able to put together that entire picture of what's happening in the county. And then along the way, right, we're making connections, we're building relationships, things that are already occurring in the county, but this process is really an opportunity to sort of re-examine those and strengthen them and sort of evaluate where they might need to go in the future. And we just wanted to zoom out here and show a little bit more about the entire process. So you can see we're in the sort of last 2/3 there in November, but we've been at this since April. So again, looking at that qualitative and quantitative research, working on focus groups with businesses, doing our interviews, putting that all together in a SWOT analysis essentially, so we could really evaluate, what's working well, what might need some improvement, what are the threats to the county, and how do we look at all of those component pieces together, put together a strategy that's really going to maximize and leverage the positive things that are already going on in the county. So we're working through the end of the year here as well. Okay, so we've got a few slides here that really highlight what the data is telling us. And this is important because, again, we really need to set the scene, understand what's happening in the county, because that has very meaningful impacts for how the strategy gets put together. So there are entire reports that have all of this data in narrative format. So we're not going to, bore you with too many data points, but I do think it's important to go through some of these highlights. So population and labor market data. I think you can see that pretty clearly. So just on the population change, essentially what we're looking at here is, so we've got this chart from the last decade or so. So back to 2010, this is showing population decline. That thick green bar is showing basically movement out of the county. The smaller sliver of that blue, that's somewhat above the zero, that's international migration. So any of the growth that was experienced in the county is actually from international migration. You can see it's quite a small sort of proportion there. But overall, right, there's been out-migration each year since 2010. And so that population decline has implications for economic opportunity, right? It's hard to have economic growth without population growth, or at least stability. So certainly that population change has implications for the opportunities and businesses in the county. Labor market. So this is showing labor force participation rate. Labor force participation rate, that shows the proportion of people that are in the labor force compared to the civilian population. So basically the proportion of people that are actually working. And so that sort of darkish green bar at the bottom there, that is Allegheny County compared to New York State, and then compared to the US. So Allegheny's labor force participation rate, you can see again, that's over time, sort of on the trending down. That is not really unique necessarily to the county. Those are trends that we're seeing in other locations as well. But you can see that it's relatively low compared to New York and the US, around 54%, while the state was about 60%. So we've got a smaller proportion of the population that is actually working. Again, has huge implications for businesses in the county. Educational attainment, this one is interesting. So you can see on the left there, these are job postings and the education requirements based on what those job postings say. So I'd say the biggest takeaway of this one, about 20% of all job postings in the county, so this is specific to Allegheny County, about 20% of those job postings require a bachelor's degree. About 10% of the population of the county has that level of educational attainment. So there's quite a gap in, right, the percentage of the population that has the educational attainment that is being asked for by businesses. And we know that there's obviously world-class educational institutions in the county, that there's immense skill and talent, truly existing in the county. Often, right, those once those students graduate, they are not staying in the region. And so there's certainly an opportunity there to keep that talent local. Manufacturing, certainly a legacy industry for the county, and not just legacy, but it's also proving to be quite productive into the future as well. What you're seeing here is growth, is job growth over the last 5 or so years. And these are the top 20 subsectors that had growth in the county. And you can see it's almost about half, I'd say, that are manufacturing related. So anything from plastics, chemicals, sawmills, medical equipment, machinery equipment and supplies. So manufacturing certainly still playing a large, important role in the county. It's the number 2 contributor to gross regional product. And as you can see there, almost a quarter of all jobs that were added between those 5 years, 2017 and 2022, they were in manufacturing. Now, on the flip side of that, right, there were losses in other subsectors involved in manufacturing. So, there's certainly a transition, I think you could say, in the manufacturing industry. We're seeing losses on the side of milk manufacturing, paint and coating manufacturing. So certainly almost a tale of two sides of the industry. On one side, we're certainly seeing job growth. On the other side, seeing a little bit of a transition. Tourism. So another foundational part of the county's economy, I would say. Overall, the state does every year a tourism analysis based on certain regions, and so they're able to tell the economic impacts based on sales tax spending and jobs and visitors to the region, and so there's lots of different ways to quantify that. That pie chart on the right there, you can see it looks at the percentage of visitor spending by county, and it's Chautauqua, Allegheny, and Cattaraugus. That's the region that the state divides this part of the state divides up the region into different sort of subsectors. And so those 3 counties make up a specific subsector, and you can see Allegheny County makes up for about 12% of total visitor spending based on those 3 counties. That was 2021 data, I believe, is the most recent. On a positive note, you can see that bottom right chart is actually showing that sales tax collection in the county grew by nearly 50% in 4 years. So certainly positive, and something to leverage and build on in the future. Just a couple more here. Agriculture, again, one of those foundational legacy industries to the county, and agriculture is one of those industries that is certainly undergoing a transformation in terms of how technology is used and really what the future of that looks like. I think the biggest takeaways for this slide is that businesses in the agricultural sector added more locations than any other sector in the economy, and agricultural workers account for about 1/3 of all self-employed in the county, which I think, sort of logically makes sense, but really interesting to see just how productive and again, where the elements of growth are in agriculture. Entrepreneurship, a really interesting category of economic development to look at. And we've got sort of 2 sides of the coin here in entrepreneurship. So on the left-hand side, that is showing the age of all businesses in the county. So how long they've existed, essentially. Almost half are at least 45 years old. And I know when we did business interviews, I don't think I've ever been in a community that had businesses that had been around for 50, 70, over 100 years. So I think that's quite a unique piece, actually, to the county's story, that the longevity of the businesses here, I think, is quite unique. On the other side, on the right-hand side of that slide, it's showing startups in sort of a group of regional counties in 2020. So Allegheny County is at the bottom there in that brown bar, the lowest compared to some of its surrounding counties in terms of startups, which, again, we know that there are fantastic resources in terms of business support and the sort of resources around business startup involved with the educational institutions and really figuring out how to connect those to the talent and skills and existing businesses and existing talent in the county is going to help move the needle on that startup number. Let me pause there on any of the data because I'll transition here to hear a little bit about what we heard in the business interviews, but I do want to pause on that data and just see if I can clarify anything on any of those slides. All right. Yeah.
We'll be getting a copy of this PowerPoint.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, a little hard to see, and I apologize for being a few minutes late. But parking's can't find a parking spot. It's really tough. But thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right, let us keep moving here. So again, data is the one side. Okay, what are the businesses saying? This is a snapshot of all of the work that we did in the county back in July, I believe it was. So we talked to 31 businesses across 4 focus groups that were held in Alfred, Cuba, Houghton, and Wellsville. And we had a range of industries. They weren't set up by any specific industry. They were set up by location. So we had everyone from outdoor recreation to restaurants to retail to manufacturing. And the span of the age of businesses was also had to be over 100 to had just opened a couple years ago. So we had quite a range of perspectives. Yes.
Let us know how many businesses were in each location. Like, was it only 2 in Alfred, or?
Yeah, we've got that off the top of my head. They're all, yeah, but yeah, we've got who was at what meeting. Yep. All right. And so again, just to put this into perspective, this is, this was the feedback from businesses. And so, right, depending on the day, depending on their experience, you know, lots of things go into what businesses gave for feedback that day. So, you know, we want to listen to what they had to say and understand the perspective that they're coming from, and look at that with all of the other information that we've got and see, you know, how that matches up with the system in the county. So a couple of highlights just to point out. I'd say the first one, just revolving around sort of where the front door of economic development is. So in other words, you know, if you've got a question, if you want to expand, if you are looking for a grant or technical assistance, you know, who do you go to? And that front door, as we call it, was, you know, in some cases people knew where to go and they maybe had found a roundabout way there and had found what they needed, but there wasn't necessarily that clear front door, single point of contact to, you know, I know I'm going to get what I need at this particular location. So that was interesting. Certainly there was a willingness or curiosity in terms of getting more involved in grant writing, technical assistance, sort of being connected to New York State's rounds of grant funding, whether that be the consolidated funding application, so that's the CFA that happens every year in July, really an interest in terms of getting more involved there. Workforce that, you know, came up again across all industries, all sizes of businesses, whether it was attracting to a specific position, whether it was retaining that worker once they were able to fill a position. You know, workforce, could not say that enough. Lastly, I think what the other thing to point out here is, right, for any business, navigating the regulatory environment can be quite challenging. And again, whether it's startup or expanding or, hey, I, you know, want to do some work on my facade and need to do some improvements. What does that process look like? And again, this is not necessarily unique to the county. We do hear similar challenges in other locations, but really worth thinking about, you know, this is where the pain points are for businesses. How do we take that information and think about, you know, our processes and what that means for how we can improve moving forward. So that's what businesses are saying. And we wanted to take a look at, you know, what the headlines were, you know, what sort of the outside sort of perspective was for the county. Because again, we've seen the data, we've heard from the businesses, and there's lots of headlines right now involving the county, involving some of the municipalities, you know, some of the business expansions and things that are going on in the county, whether it's, you know, New York Forward in Wellsville, whether it's awards to the land bank, solar facilities, announcements around the educational institutions. There's no lack of you know, activity to sort of talk about in the county. And it's interesting to see sort of, again, this like outside perspective about what, you know, people are saying about the county. And I think we want to take a minute here to actually do a little bit of an activity and reflection for this group. Because, you know, in the news, we can sort of see what they're saying, we can see what the recent announcements are, but just to get a sense of, where this group is at and what the expectations are from the plan, what we want to do is just take a second and think, okay, in 5 years from now, this strategic plan has been implemented successfully. We've, knocked off 80% of all of our initiatives. We've been, quote unquote, successful. What does that look like to each of you individually? What does success look like? That could be job growth, that could be housing growth, that could be quality of life improvements, that could be things stay, relatively stable. There's no right or wrong answer here, but I think we've got some pieces of paper that are being handed out along with markers. And if you want to take 5 minutes, think what you would want to see as a headline for Allegheny County in the next 5 years if this strategic plan, this economic development strategic plan, is successful. What are the headlines going to say?
Right, nice and big, is we're going to put them on the
And when you're done, if you want to just give them to myself or Krista in the green blazer here, I want to hang them all up and see what the connective themes are.
You're looking for one primary thing, or?
Yeah, if you had to capture, a headline, so say 1 or 2 sentences, what would be the standouts in that headline? You can probably make 1 to 3 points most, probably. we'll talk through the themes and shared similarities. So if you want to get a little bit closer to the writing, we'll have a discussion just over there for a minute. I got to look at them. Okay, let's see, ribbon cutting, thank you, for 100-plus unit townhouses, so we've got housing, hotel opens at Crossroads, population growth, low unemployment rate, manufacturing jobs are on the rise, agritourism and recreation, increased sales tax, it's a very specific one. Innovative plan keeps college undergrads with a suggestion for a initiative, it sounds like. Business growth, creating jobs and living wages. Influx of new businesses because of recent housing development, so tying in that housing piece. 10% population growth, housing. Allegheny County opens New York State's newest park at the Bromley Estate, creating 1,000 new jobs. we're dreaming big here. And let's see, Allegheny County leads the way for rural counties and makes great progress in tourism, workforce, and economic development. So, I mean, just putting a couple of these themes together, right? There's quite a few that tie in the possibility of economic growth, job creation to housing, to the availability of housing. So that is something interesting to keep in mind. But I think the overall theme, right, with all of these would be, right, job growth leading to prosperity for the county's residents, whether that's in recreation jobs, manufacturing jobs, startups. Any other? Oh, go ahead.
Just a comment. We've had this discussion. Housing is a major issue for those in the county currently. But as far as that's private. Well, state, not some communities. It's not private, but if there's a demand, that will come, because that's private industry. And then somebody, an entrepreneur, will see a chance to make some money and build some homes. That's my take on it.
So we've definitely got some components to talk about housing in a little bit, and that connection, and again, not an issue unique to Allegheny County, clearly all across the state, the nation really, but there are some creative interventions, might not be quite the right word, but innovative partnerships, I would say, to help fill those gaps, because the need is extreme, right? I think it's fair to say. Any other themes or positive things that anyone wants to point out from all of the headlines? Krista, anything that you wanted to point out?
No, this is great. This kind of aligns ultimately with where your priorities are and your vision is, and yeah, I appreciate everyone's taking the time to provide your input.
All right, well, this is going to help tie into the strategy, which we're going to talk about. So thanks, everyone. We'll get back to our seats and head back to the next part of the presentation. Would you mind just advancing? One more. Okay. There you go.
All right. So we thought at this point, we've been talking a lot about the county and what trends are happening locally. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're working on an economic development strategy for the county, right? So we wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit and just talk about what's happening across the state and the country, really, in terms of where economic development is today, because a lot has changed in the field of economic development, even in the last 15 years or so since I've been working in the field. And, Alex and I live and breathe this every day. And so we wanted to just let you know kind of what we're seeing and what that means in terms of strategy development for Allegheny County. So why do we even do economic development? It's about planning and organizing and acting to support our goals within the economy. Common end goals are job stability and creation, stabilizing the tax base, diversifying the tax base, so as things happen in the world, we can be resilient and strong and adapt. Diversification, so that comes with diversification, and then also wealth creation and creating equity for the businesses and the people that live and work in the region. In terms of trends, when economic development in the 70s was first kind of became a thing, it was all about very project-specific initiatives. Economic developers were all about swinging for the fences, big game hunting, and it was very tactical and transactional. You had your deals and your incentives and your sites in place, and you went out and sold those things and went out and attracted major companies. It wasn't about people. It wasn't about entrepreneurs. They kind of did their own thing. It was really about the big companies. That has changed significantly. And what has changed is that instead of having all the deals and incentives and thinking about, what assets in the community has to sell, it is still all of that. And it's much more data driven than it used to be. It's much more strategic. You're thinking about industry clusters and beyond that, industry ecosystems, because you can't even tell sometimes the difference between a manufacturing industry and a technology industry and an agriculture business. They're all combined, right? Where do drones who are working in ag fields fit in terms of who produces those drones? Is that a manufacturer? Is that a data company? It's all of the above. So the way we think about emerging opportunities and trends, and the way we think about the way we do economic development is very much data and knowledge driven and more around sustained growth. You're thinking about entrepreneurship and small business development. You're thinking about main streets. Quality of place is critical, because what economic development is today, in addition to what it has been, it's evolved into being more about people than it ever has before. It is about who is in your workforce, it is about who are your entrepreneurs, and how do we make sure that we are supporting the labor force to be skilled, but also have the wraparound services and amenities that they need, whether you're trying to get people into their first job or you're trying to attract top talent to your innovative companies. It's all about creating the places and the systems for those people to be able to support companies in your economy. Alex, did you want to add anything to that based on what you've seen?
No, I think that's perfect.
All right. Questions on that, or anything that you've seen in your own county about how economic development has changed? Is that all making sense?
Right on target with it too. So,
Cool.
there's several different programs in the county that run it, and so it's been a focus for a while. It's just sometimes the funding to make them even more supportive is sometimes missing.
Absolutely.
Can I just add remote workers?
Yes.
Okay.
'Cause
Yes.
It's huge in Allegheny County.
In the last couple years, especially, right? And that has disrupted the real estate market, I'm sure, and even more so. And with, Albany has so much vacant space around me. So yeah, those disruptions and trends are constantly changing. So we're working in an environment that's constantly changing. But remote workers are definitely an opportunity that this region has. Anything else? Any other trends that you're seeing?
Well, I've noticed like the wages in this county seem to have been going down. We lost our major manufacturing that had living wages, and now we have a lot of retail where I know just in my family alone, they moved out of this county because they couldn't afford to live here. You know, they couldn't afford to make a living. Like my son went to Seneca Falls where he makes $15,000 more a year doing the same thing. His wife's a nurse and makes about the same, about $15,000, $20,000 more a year up in the other county because they can pay more because there's more jobs. Is that trending all over, or is that? I mean, not necessarily because they went up to Seneca Falls and they're making a lot more than they could down here and they can live. And that's what I'm hearing from people on the street too. Is that's why they're leaving, is because they can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah, the trend of, especially in rural places like this, of the housing market leading kind of growth, but the wages not catching up, and your people are you are competing with the larger urban areas that have that higher concentration, higher density economies of scale.
And on top of that, our property taxes are outrageous. So
Exactly.
it's, you know, we can't pay them, but yet we want to tax them to death too. So
All the things. Yeah, so it's a super easy problem to solve. But in terms of back to what economic development does, typical functions include business retention and expansion, right? Connecting with our existing business community and making sure they're strong. Attracting new businesses, we talked about that. We talked about targeting industry clusters and sectors, definitely still part of what economic developers do and the economic development system needs to do. Increasing into entrepreneurship and innovation. And when I think about entrepreneurship and innovation, take a very broad definition. It's about not only your kind of high-tech or highly innovative companies that are entrepreneurs that are building something new. It's also about your Main Street businesses and the businesses that are providing the community culture and the quality of place for the area. Workforce development, you know, between Alex and I, we talk to well over 1,000 businesses a year across the country through focus groups and interviews just like we have here. And the number one thing that they need is workers. Now, the specific problems for each business are different, but it is the absolute biggest elephant in the room when it comes to strengthening and growing economies. Downtowns, infrastructure, sites, still very, very important. Continuing to make sure that we have, you know, the best quality water, the best quality main streets, that our buildings and infrastructure are continuing to be invested in. You know, I like to say that our downtowns and commercial hubs are among the most resilient of our built environment because we adapt those places to the needs of the evolving economy. So continuing to think about what do we need our downtowns and our, you know, little main streets to be now and into the future to support the economy of today and tomorrow. And then, of course, housing. Housing wasn't on this slide when I put it together 3 or 4 years ago. It's key now to make sure that we are actively doing what we can to create a range of housing. Back to the housing question just a little bit. Yes, it's mostly private development, and when you're an economic developer, you do not have the full lever to pull in that space. But what's happened across the country is that during the recession, the construction industry really collapsed, and it has never recovered. It has never built back to where that is. So the cost of doing construction, this is a very simplified, crude way of explaining it, has increased significantly. So the only way for a developer to get an ROI that they need in most markets, and again, we haven't done the study here, but in most places, is to build high-end, top-of-the-line, very expensive housing. And that's not what most communities need. They can't get the ROI they need to build those first-time homes and things like that. So that's the challenge, and where as economic developers, we need to help close that funding gap so we can get the types of housing that we need to support the workforce that we need. So, economic development's more than deals and incentives. It's also about people and the networks that we work in across all those different elements of what economic development is, and the organizations that do have the different levers to pull that we need to pull to move in the directions that we want to go. So relationships are incredibly important. Communication and collaboration across government systems, across stakeholders, is, you know, with your chambers and all the different entities that work in different spaces of economic development. That collaboration is really, really important. Economic developers, they're deal makers, but if you like sports analogies, they're like the point guard. Or if you're a volleyball player, they are the setter. I was a volleyball player. They are the people who are looking on the horizon. They're setting up the plays, but they're not scoring. It's the private sector and the community that's really, taking the risk oftentimes. But you're the people who are kind of driving the system and working across multiple systems when you're an economic developer. So we talked a little bit about trends. Again, workforce, incredibly important. Tech of everything. Everything is data-driven. Everything is smart systems. Even your very long-standing manufacturing companies are constantly thinking about and looking at how they can automate. And automate is not a scary term. It's an opportunity to upskill people, and so they can produce more with the same number of people and still achieve their own goals. It's about ecosystems and connections, quality of place and housing, and then working in an environment of rapid change and uncertainty. And this used to be really hard to explain, except the last couple of years with the pandemic, everyone has gone through this. You all understand what that means now to work in a space of rapid change and uncertainty, and so many things were accelerated just because of that, and that's unfortunately not changing when we have things like AI, and quantum computing, and just different technologies that are out there that are affecting the way that we live and do things. It dramatically affects the way that our businesses, what they need to stay strong. So, any comments, feedback, questions on kind of trends in generally in economic development before we slide into what the framework or the strategy looks like? Yeah.
And looking at all the things that we've kind of identified throughout the years, I'm glad we're at the point where we'll have a strategic plan, because I think we've known those are the cases. Now just the plan to start making them happen. And I do like that you pointed out some of the significant changes in economic development than what it has been in the past. So finding that roadmap to start doing them are prioritizes and stages and steps that we can start working on.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right. Tim, did you want to kind of set the framework here? Do you guys want to break, or do you want to keep going? We're on a roll? Okay. Alex made the executive decision.
Okay, keep going. Okay. All right. What the part of what we looked at through the plan development and looking at where do we need to be and how is this going to affect what we're doing moving forward. We did within the last year or so, we looked at framing out the economic development office and department and looking at some of those trends. What we're looking at now is whether or not we've made some good decisions. Do we need to tweak some of that? And the reality could be that we do. And what Camoin and Associates has done for us is to look at some opportunities that are currently out there in other counties, models that have been tried and true, and also where we might be able to look at some of those opportunities and structures and how we might be able to make them our own. It's very difficult to look and say that, just pick on Chautauqua County, or no, it's probably not a good example. Let's take Schuyler. Whatever what works in Schuyler doesn't necessarily work for us. So what we have to do is take a look at some of the options and opportunities that we have to develop something that is unique but operational for Allegheny County. So one of the pieces that we're going to be doing now is looking at suggestions, models, and other opportunities that may be out there. And we ask you to kind of keep an open mind on this, because you may hear some things that sound extremely radical, and you may hear some things that say that's common sense. But the obvious piece is that these are ideas and concepts that we can use and take and borrow and then develop into something that is unique to Allegheny County and will help us move forward in the realm of economic development activities, be it that holistic approach of housing, entrepreneurial activities, attracting businesses, working collaboratively with the IDA, working collaboratively with other entities within the county that we have not or may not have been doing a great job in achieving to this point. So I hope I've covered that, and Alex is going to then.
And there's another handout coming your way that's going to mirror the content that we're going to get to in the slides here. So let me get caught up. And so like Tim mentioned, this first part is going to be the roadmap. So this is, right, thinking about all of the themes and concepts that we have talked about thus far and, you know, what's going to set the county up for success. If we could, is it possible to go back to the slides? All right, everyone's got a handout in front of them. Okay. So this is how we are thinking about the framework, to the point about, you know, we sort of know what needs to be done, but how do we do it? Think of this as the framework. So we've got foundational themes and economic development functions. The foundational themes are really those elements that need to be solidified and strengthened and in place in order to be able to successfully tackle the economic development function. So just looking on the left-hand side at those foundational themes, having the expertise in economic development, the collaboration, and the industry engagement, that relationship with the private sector, all of those key themes, those are really, you know, at the top of the list to ensure that any of the items that are on the right, whether it's marketing, whether it's thinking about growing opportunity sectors, whether it's tackling workforce challenges, all of those foundational themes really need to be strengthened, solidified, to be able to deliver on this roadmap successfully, essentially. This framework is put into place so that, you know, in 5-10 years, we see those headlines in the news. So just sort of logistically about the plan, you know, the way we set this up, goals, big ideas, what do we want to achieve, initiatives, what's the thing that's actually going to be accomplished, and then the actions, the actual sort of operational function that's going to get us to our goals. For time's sake, for the purposes of the discussion, we're really focusing on those goals and initiatives. Know that you know, we've been working with the county team on the action, so there is more detail than what you see in front of you and what you'll see on the slides. But we want to give a sort of 30,000-foot view on the framework, on the goals and initiatives, have some, you know, feedback there, and know that there are additional actions to move this forward. All right, so starting with that economic development expertise part. Now, this is, again, something, to Krista's point, that is changing rapidly, changing all the time. There is economic development know-how and proficiency in the county that is just it's an ongoing need, right? It's an ongoing need to learn about new trends and systems and approaches to workforce development, or approaches to business attraction, or how AI is impacting your business community and what that means for you as an economic developer in terms of how you can help them. And so whether that's resources through the New York State Economic Development System, learning from peers throughout the state, you know, this is something that really is again, foundational, something that is, you know, going on right now. And it's less about starting it and more about bringing more people into that expertise, right? It's about building the economic development community, expertise, and know-how. So it's not, you know, retained within one or two individuals, but it's really a team effort. And so there are, whether it's conferences, webinars, again, just learning informally from peers, there's likely a county that has, gone through a similar situation or, whatever it might be, there's an opportunity to continue and grow those conversations. The 1B there, one of the things we heard a lot about, again, was being tapped into the New York State system of grants and technical assistance. There are certainly challenges with that system that an everyday business, they're tough to navigate. I've done grant administration and grant writing for the CFAs, and they make me want to pull my hair out. So the everyday business really, they're busy running their business. They are not experts in grant writing most often. So thinking proactively about developing those projects and setting the county and their businesses up for success, not just a month before that grant opportunity, which happens every year in July, thinking, 6 months ahead, building that project list. Where are the opportunities that we've heard about, and really fostering those projects along in that 6-month period prior to the CFA opening. And that's just one example. There are plenty of grant opportunities, again, whether it's regional, state, in some cases national, depending on the size of the business. Really an opportunity to, again, just be proactive and think strategically about how we're helping our businesses in those efforts. And so just to sort of summarize the outcome of that, if we're expanding the staff expertise in economic development, we're getting efficient delivery of those core services, we are building the group expertise around economic development, and essentially welcoming more people in to the tent. Let's see, local and regional collaboration. This is a particularly important one, I'd say, for rural communities in particular. Important across the board, but certainly important in a rural community where resources are dispersed in different locations, right? They're not necessarily as concentrated, and people are dispersed across the county. So thinking really strategically about utilizing and leveraging resources that might already exist on that regional level, whether it's through Southern Tier West, whether it's through Invest Buffalo Niagara, right? We're thinking very big on the scale of regional collaboration. And that is really the trend in economic development as well. Really to think across jurisdictional borders, right? Economic development doesn't necessarily stop at a county boundary. Those are, boundaries for different reasons, and business does not necessarily follow those boundaries. So really important to think about leveraging the resources that do exist. Maybe they are based in a different county, but they have satellites in Allegheny or vice versa, and treating those resources as if they really are, again, foundational to the support of economic development and all the goals that we've talked about in the county. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to talk about the local, this one with the one before it. They don't seem to quite match in my world. So I don't understand how a little business in Allegheny County who needs help, I'm just writing notes down.
Sure.
They needed help from the agencies, but then we're talking about going to, say, Niagara Falls for, these little, explain how that process works to me. I'm not getting that because I know these people don't have time to tie their shoes, so.
Yes. No. So it would be, right, it's about identifying the appropriate resources. So in that case, a small business, right, they are not going to Buffalo to get whatever technical assistance or support they might need. Maybe, if it's a connection to the SBDC that is based at Jamestown Community College and they have satellite hours in Allegheny County, and maybe that's, so they do have specific satellite hours around the region. Off the top of my head, I don't know specific.
Well, and I just am asking this.
Yeah.
I told Brooke, sometimes I poke the bear, and I'm sorry, but I do have
No, it's
background in
fair.
this as well.
So I will say that we had conversations, I'll pick on the SBDC, but with service providers in general that are really open to expanding their services in the county.
And we just had one with that, the Jamestown thing in
Yeah.
Fillmore, and
Oh, great.
we had over 30 people there.
That's
It was great,
Yeah.
but they don't have a satellite branch, and those people don't have time to go to Jamestown. That's
Yes,
my
it
point
does.
with these two slides.
Yes, and yeah, the satellite, I get, is more often a pop-up is probably the more accurate term, right? Because they are coming for, what is that, an afternoon or a morning, yeah. But, right, that speaks to the demand that's clearly there for whatever services, right, that was being discussed. So working regionally in specific contexts for, I bring up in Buffalo Niagara for maybe it's site development, or they've got a business in Buffalo that wants to get out of that region for whatever reason, and they have a better fit in this area because there's more available space, or whatever it might be. That those conversations at least are open, and they are aware of what Allegheny County has to offer in the right circumstance. For small businesses, for sure, it's got to be as close to them as possible. The services coming to them, ideally, and more frequently than even once a quarter, once a month. It's when the problem comes up, and they need support. Anything else on those two slides? All right, let's chat about industry engagement. And this goes to the piece that Krista was talking about business retention and expansion, or we tend to just say BR&E for short. So the attraction of businesses, right, is sort of the exciting, tends to be the exciting, catchy part of economic development. Those are the things that grabs headlines. But the businesses that are within the county, right, the existing businesses, the ones that are, showing up to the event in the evening, or the ones that have been here for over 100 years, those are the backbone of the business community. And a majority of economic activity or economic growth tends to come from existing businesses, not the ones that are those sort of big fish that are attracted in. And so it is just as important to really have a strong connection built on trust with that existing business community. Because the last thing you want to find out, right, is a business is leaving because, X, Y, and Z. That red flag could have been alerted, maybe earlier on in the system. There's always going to be changeover, loss, some just are not, going to make it. But the opportunity to really have that strong connection and trust with existing businesses can really go a long way. Again, in building the reputation for the business environment for outside companies that might be looking inside. Your best representatives are going to be your existing businesses. And so certainly, again, something that's happening now just on a day-to-day basis, but it all goes back to being data-driven. So a conversation that you're having with the business, and they say, we've been looking for 3 engineers for 6 months now. That's information. That is knowledge that an economic developer can use and say, I've heard from 4 other businesses that engineers are the most in-demand thing that they are unable to hire for. How do we connect them to the education, the educational institutions, and learn what's going on at the community college about training and engineering, or whatever, insert whatever position it might be. So that industry engagement, that's why that's one of those foundational elements. You're getting real-time information about business needs, what's happening on the ground, keeping those businesses in the county, and growing from within, which again, really important element for a rural community like Allegheny County, honestly, anywhere across New York State, the growing from within, keeping that talent local, really important to successful economic development.
I think it's pretty important for this part this is where the collaborations are really important. Because I've worked for businesses for close to 20 years in different capacities. And the trust with coming to the county or government
Yeah.
or so forth is not always there. And so having the businesses reach out per se to only the county for that, I mean, if we can build a framework that delivers people through, I think that would be helpful. We want to help, even when I have my county hat on. But it's not always perceived that way. So having those collaborations and that trust, you said, and developing, I think is probably one of the most important steps to make that happen.
Yeah.
So,
And to your point too, recognizing that the county doesn't have all the answers to this, and the county is not necessarily maybe the appropriate. It's not going to play the role of the lead in all of these, but they know who the entity is that is going to play the lead in workforce or certain elements that we're talking about here. So the county doesn't have to be all things. It just has to be able to be the connector in that case.
Alex, if I can jump in for a
Yeah, of
second.
course.
So this is a programmatic recommendation. So we're basically recommending that the county, establishes a formal business retention and expansion program, which means proactively meeting businesses where they're at through site visits and an annual digital survey. Because the way we look at it, every conversation that we have with a business, that's data and intelligence that can tell you not only what's going on with that business and what their needs are, but systematically across the county, what is going on in terms of markets across the county. So, and absolutely, collaboration is really, really important. If we're going to visit a manufacturer and we know that they have workforce needs, let's bring our workforce folks along with us for that visit, or our SBDC folks along for other visits if we know it's a small business who might be able to use those services. So that's what we're trying to do, is not wait until there's a problem, get out ahead of those problems so they're easier to fix and not a ginormous issue.
Just a quick question for you. So you suggest collaboration that's led by someone, an entity, a business, not a business, but
No.
a person or a agency.
Yep.
So for instance, yeah, right, that we can't fold. So like in my area, some of the businesses that have the most people attending them are seasonal. And so that would be a way to like you'd want to work on collaboration between those seasonal
Absolutely.
businesses and other businesses, right? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and that's part of the issue. The what you're doing is you're getting that information, so then you can follow up immediately, or you need to speak to this person and help, make those connections faster, so they're not floundering, trying to, especially if they're new to the community, figure out who to talk to. The economic development professional that is doing these visits can, make those connections and help just speed up that whole process. Does that make sense?
Did I take your slide?
You did. That's okay.
That's why. You want to stay up here? What, I forget.
Marketing might be next.
Could we just advance to the next slide if you wouldn't mind? If it's
But you're
marketing.
doing great.
Okay, we'll jump in.
Okay.
Okay, marketing. So this gets into the economic development functions. So again, a little bit back to what we laid the groundwork for. It is a competitive world out there in economic development. And, you are going to tell your story best. Allegheny County is going to tell your story best. You're going to tell the stories of your businesses. You're going to tell the stories of those businesses that have been here for over 100 years, or the small business down the street that we talked to one that she started making bread in her basement during the pandemic and then opened a storefront in her community. Like, what a fantastic success story. So telling those success stories on a digital platform that is easily accessible, to new businesses, existing businesses, just the everyday citizen, right? They want to know what's happening in their community and what businesses are popping up in their backyard. So we know that the county has the economic development website, so there's certainly a starting point. And it's more about strategically putting information on that website, so that's certainly a positive that exists. There's certain elements, again, that we go into in the plan that are absolutely necessary, whether it's available sites, understanding where businesses can grow, and even if the sites are in process and not quite development ready, if a business comes to your site and the website and cannot immediately find workforce information, site information, and what your existing industry mix is, chances are they're moving on to the next community, next website, whatever it is. So that digital infrastructure is really important. Going back to that front door, this is your digital front door that's going to be supported by the individuals on the ground. I think that is the main point from anything to add. Okay.
I will add, it's about, we want to see kind of internal marketing dedicated to economic development, not mixed in with everything else that the county government has to communicate and engage with residents and businesses on. So we need a dedicated website that's up to date and has elements that Alex was talking about, dedicated social media. We would recommend, and obviously all this takes time and capacity, right? But we would recommend internally a Facebook page dedicated to the county's economic development that's focused on promoting existing businesses, letting folks know what events are available, and promoting existing business resources. So you're talking to the business community and the internal residents. And then also a LinkedIn page where you're engaging with the broader economic development community within your neighboring ecosystems, within kind of the New York economic development community, ESD, all the above. I know Craig probably has all those connections through his personal LinkedIn account, but we also want those connections kind of through a county-focused economic development account on LinkedIn, because that opens you up to these broader networks and you can kind of see what's going on regionally.
All right. Opportunity sectors. So in a world where we've got limited resources, limited time, right, we've got to look at the sectors that have the greatest, that are well suited to grow in Allegheny County. And so some of the data that we talked about earlier helps set the stage for that. But whether it's certain subsectors of manufacturing, we would consider your main streets as an opportunity sector area to continue growing. These are areas that you would want to point out on that on the digital, on the website for economic development for the county. You'd want to make sure that those are front and center, because that helps tell other businesses that they've got an ecosystem of workforce there, right? If you've got a couple of subsects of certain manufacturers, you've got certain workforce available there, that tells other manufacturers that, hey, they do a similar thing that we do. We know that there's certain talent in the county. We know that the educational institutions, they might do certain trainings for certain positions that they might be able to partner with. So it's not to say that, we are limiting growth to certain industries. This is saying that dedicating resources to these certain particular industries, it's going to lay the groundwork for other parts of the economy to grow. And so it's really thinking about, again, how we use our resources strategically. Part of that, again, growing from within, looking at the entrepreneurial resources, we know that there are hubs of those throughout the county. And, we're talking about regionally and how to bring certain resources to certain places, even within the county, right? One end to the other it's not an easy commute on a Tuesday night, or north-south, just sort of the perception of, where you can find resources. And so all about spreading those throughout the county, because we know that there are really world-class entrepreneurial educators and resources that exist, but making sure that they are spread throughout the county. Lastly, we've talked a little bit about tourism, but that I would bring up here as well, that certainly an opportunity to continue expanding that network and the visitation into the county. That has positive implications, right, for the tourism businesses we were talking about, has implications for main streets, right, people visiting and going to main streets, as well as some of the other activities they might be doing. In order to rightfully welcome, more visitors, that requires some additional amenities. So whether that's lodging, event spaces, additional restaurants, outdoor outfitters, right, to fit the activities that happen in Allegheny County. It's the pieces have got to continue to come together to be able to successfully expand those visitation numbers. Can we just go to the next slide? Thank you. All right, workforce. We've seen, right, this has come up in a lot of different examples already. We know, right, that the county plays a role in this, but there are educational partners, service providers in Allegheny County and in the region that are playing a role day in and day out at talking with employers, at delivering new programs. Something that is changing truly every time we do a site visit. I feel like a new training module or training center or apprenticeship, has popped up with a new private sector employer. And so, again, this is common in other places, thinking about workforce and economic development as being, as they have to be integrated. For a long time, for the last 20 years, they've sort of gone on their own paths, and we would really recommend, again, this is happening in some capacity, but really thinking about continuing to integrate economic development and workforce at any opportunity there is. Site development. This is an important one across the board, but particularly, right, if we're talking about larger businesses that might need sites to expand, or if we're thinking about attracting into the county, we might want to show, say XYZ manufacturer that a certain parcel is available for them to build, a hotel, right? We know those conversations have been had. All of that goes back to where does this activity happen? It's all well and good to say, we want a hotel or XYZ manufacturer, but ultimately the setting the stage for where that occurs, again, is going to start those conversations with those businesses. So whether it's building relationships with utility companies, and again, this is already happening, but continuing to expand and grow these relationships with utility companies, with existing businesses, with obviously other utility providers. We know that the county has, is working on understanding the sewer capacity a little bit better, and that's going to have implications for site development. It's really a multi-layered relationship building to advance site development. And again, this is one of those elements that the regional collaboration can play a part in. Again, just understanding what's happening in other parts of the region, what the demand is, whether there's movement right across out of more populated areas into different settings. Lots of opportunities to learn from what's going on at the regional level. All right, I think this is our last one here, and then we'll take a pause. So, community assets. Again, I think we've made our approach to economic development clear that yes, we're talking jobs, we're talking businesses, we're talking sites, but we're also talking main streets and entrepreneurs and artisans and, you know, community events and festivals and all of the elements that make you want to live in Allegheny County, all of the elements that make a visitor want to come to Allegheny County for a weekend or, you know, 1 week a year with their family, whatever it might be. Those are all incredibly important to building the environment that ensures that business can be successful, that they can attract workers here that want to stay and live here. And so, again, whether it's particular festivals or we talked to a couple artisans that were talking about some of the work that they do in the community and elevating their profile and growing that sector in particular. Lots of opportunity to continue building on what already exists. And then we come to housing. Lots of different places that could fit. We fit it under community assets. I mean, right, it's really a community necessity these days. But again, we've heard in many, many instances that employers are losing workers because they cannot find suitable housing within appropriate driving distance of whatever the company might be. And so certainly, Krista talked a little bit about this, certainly private sector is leading the way on this, but there are certain things that the county or public sector can do to set the stage, whether that be building those relationships with developers, or it might be looking at maybe land use regulations to make sure that the regulations are welcoming to housing development, if that's something that a community wants to pursue, and that it's not inhibiting the growth of housing, which we see in many cases. And so there certainly is a role to play for the community there, a role for the public sector to play in continuing to tackle housing, which needs a whole task force unto itself. So outcomes here, right, we're looking at a strong sense of community, strong commercial main streets, which are hubs for business activity, in addition to being community hubs, and hopefully working towards a housing inventory that is building on all of the elements that we've talked about today. I believe that is the last one here. So let's pause. Yes.
A comment on the housing that
Yes.
I'm finding interesting. Just yesterday, I had a conversation with an individual who has the capacity to sell lots for housing, that kind of thing, up in the Houghton area. And the problem we're having is new employees coming to town, can't find housing. The last 4 big houses that were bought, a firefighter from Buffalo retired, Houghton, a pastor from outside the county retired to Houghton, a teacher from Long Island retired to Allegheny County. That's good, but it's taking up the available houses that open up. So we need definitely.
And so one of the things, just, anecdotally, that's showing demand, right? And so one of the things that we would recommend is actually doing a housing needs assessment. So you're putting numbers behind that demand, because often cases that is that assessment is going to be needed for pursuing grant funding, financing, working with developers. Anecdotally, I think everyone, right, has a story about not being able to find housing, or they know someone, but having that needs assessment and being able to point to, what X amount of units, rental and owner occupied, that it really transforms the ability to make some moves in housing.
Well, that even goes for the seasonal housing. We have a lot of seasonal employees that stay in Steuben County, where we're at. They come and they commute, so Steuben County gets out of their business because, we got 200 people working on the solar project, that are staying outside our county because they can't find, with the windmills, we kind of benefited for that in Steuben County because the campsites over there couldn't handle them. Most of those guys brought their campers, and we have a plenty of campsites, but the seasonal people that come in for these solar panels, they don't. And so we're losing to all the hotels and all the, everything. Steuben County is getting all of our seasonal workers.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
that's one thing to look at too, is seasonal housing.
Absolutely.
Our hotels are more,
Yep, absolutely. Help quantify that.
This board has talked about having a housing study done too. And anytime that I've talked to any housing developers, that's the first thing they ask for.
Yeah.
And, we may know and see things happening why we need more housing.
Right.
But they need those numbers to statistically invest all that money because it's their money they're investing. And to make sure that there would be a market that would support it, so.
Is there another hand over here?
I'm taking notes here as we're going through this, and I want to go back to square one, the open single front door point of contact. What we need to do, and I think what we intend to do, but I can hardly wait, for us to stand up an adequate economic development department. That's going to consist of probably a director, a deputy, maybe a specialist, maybe a secretary, but we got to get serious about this. If we ever want to succeed, we can't just give it lip service and hope it happens.
Absolutely.
Gresham was talking about people being concerned about coming to the county for their needs and whatever, and that's been a problem we need to fix. We have a number of departments that I wouldn't want to go talk to. They're just, the customer service is not a thing in government. We have to install it, I think, or instill it. Your economic development director and his department, her department, has to be friendly, receptive, and knowledgeable, and they have to concentrate on connecting, communicating, and collaborating. And until we get a plan for an adequate economic development department, a plan, we're just going to be spinning our wheels. Thank you.
That is a fantastic transition to our next part in terms of how. It's like I planted that, but I want to make sure if there's any other. Yeah, go ahead.
We still got our economic director position. Is it still, we got posted, advertised, to fill that? We're not getting a lot of interest, is that correct? I think we know the problems. It's just trying to get those tools interested in coming here. Thank you.
So maybe, I imagine we'll get into some more conversation. We've got about 25 minutes left here, and our last section, which I will let you talk about, Krista, are implementation concepts in terms of the body that tackles the whole list that we just talked about and what that might look like and what other parts of the state have done and some lessons learned. So I think we've got a second handout as well for that. Here it is. Yep, thanks very much. It's just one. Yeah, there's one page there. Did you want to do elements of success or do you want me to? Oh. Do you feel like you did it? Yeah, if you want, but I mean, these are yours. Okay, I'm back. Okay, does everyone, yeah, it's just one sheet for the handout. Yep.
Yeah. We had two, but we decided not to use the second page, so that's why there's a staple. Sorry.
All right, so all of the things that this gentleman just listed, right, those are absolutely, I would include in this list. But when we look across the state and look at the county specifically and the work that needs to be done in economic development, there's a few things that, right, boil down to elements of success. How is the county going to be successful in delivering the roadmap, the plan that we just went through? What is the entity that leads economic development? What factors or characteristics does it need to have to be successful? So again, I wouldn't necessarily call this an exhaustive list, but I'd say these are definitely the things that rise to the top. So we're looking at an entity that avoids duplication. There's many players in this space, and we are looking for an entity that can be the connector and facilitator, but it does not have to do all of the things that we just talked about. It doesn't have to necessarily do marketing and attract businesses and all of the things that we just talked about. It has to be able to facilitate the experts in the field that do those things. So we're avoiding duplication. It's going to listen and respond to community needs. So it's got to be flexible. It's got to have an ear to the ground. It's got to have close connections with businesses so that it's intaking data quickly and it's turning that around. And again, making connections to people who can solve those problems, or it can, retain that data for 6 months and then look at a spreadsheet and say, we've been hearing this from businesses for 6 months. We need to do something about X, Y, and Z problems. So we really need to be responding to community needs. It needs to be that welcome front door to economic development that we've talked about a couple times today. So it's got to have a clear purpose, clear role in the not just county, but really regional economic development ecosystem. It's got to be efficient with its resources. It's got to be able to leverage resources that it can bring in with other partners. And so that could be other public sector, it could be other nonprofit, it could be other private. We are looking at leveraging as many resources as possible. It's got to lead and continue those partnerships and collaborations that we've talked so much about today. Ideally, we're looking at an entity that can raise and potentially administer funds. We're getting resources out the door to businesses. And lastly, perhaps this speaks to all those other elements, right? It's the flexibility to adapt programming and services because, right, whether it's the pandemic or another major economic event, this entity has to be able to flip on a dime, get, in the case of the pandemic, get grant resources out. And again, there's instances of that happening in the county, but really looking at, what entity might be able to do that maybe on a even more flexible, in a more flexible way, more frequently. I would, put all of these elements together and think about, okay, what type of entity could that be if these are the elements of success that we are thinking about? So to talk a little bit through some examples of economic development organizations, Krista is going to talk about some of the lessons learned from some of these locations across the state.
So we have some case studies here of just existing or past clients that we've worked with. So Advance Albany County Alliance is very new. They did their very similar process. They had a county department that was not staffed or understaffed, and they didn't have a plan, and they don't have a regional economic development entity for the county itself. They had an IDA that was kind of doing small deals, but they were understaffed and under-resourced. So they hired us in 2018 to do a strategy. And at the end of that, they were thinking that they would, the recommendation was to actually form a 501c3 and kind of keep the economic development out of Albany politics, is probably the best way to say that. And so they popped with their organization and are moving really fast. They have a BRE program, they've got staff, and kind of a lessons learned from that specific one is the CEO was supposed to be an interim CEO. He came out of retirement to help move everything forward, and Kevin O'Connor is still there. He's doing a great job. They actually won Project of the Year through the New York State EDC. But finding that person to take over this organization has been a challenge for them. Naturally Lewis recently again went through this process of, how do we think about getting our economic development mission accomplished, and it took them 2 years to kind of reorganize, and they actually brought in a couple organizations. They also created a 501c3 and brought in the IDA. So the IDA has its separate board, but they provide staff. So they have a core team of economic development staff, and so they staff the IDA and they staff tourism and other marketing, but they have this kind of separate, unifying, very strong brand, Naturally Lewis, that's been around for a couple years. But that process of thinking, okay, how do we partner with this organization or the chambers took about 2 years for them. It's a slow process. It takes time. Something that we've learned from Chautauqua that you may know about is getting legal support at the very beginning to make sure that you are in alignment with all the weird rules and things that are applied, especially to IDAs or LDCs, is very important. So the very first thing to think about is, get advice from your attorneys constantly, and make sure that whatever direction you end up moving aligns with what you want to do for economic development. Think Dutchess has been around for a while. They actually provide staff and are the kind of one-stop shop for 10 different economic development organizations throughout the county. They're super efficient, probably one of the best entities that we work with. They just get the most done for a very small staff. And that's because they are the known entity. That's where you go in your business for any of the services you possibly could need. You go to the folks that Think Dutchess, and they will get you to the right people. And they take a case management approach. So if they don't just say, oh, go talk to this person, they circle back with that business and they say, how did that conversation go? What do you need from us? Are you getting what you need? And so they take a very data-driven, focused approach on that. Some other lessons learned overall is to, go slow, move forward based on trust around shared values. You all kind of gave us your vision here, and you have shared principles in this room about what you want to achieve in the county. And much of that, I'm sure, resonates throughout the county with other partners and stakeholders. So kind of keep going back to those discussions as you think about, which direction you need to move and how you want to do that. But one of the first things that we would recommend thinking about is developing a recognizable brand and identity for economic development in the county that is purely, recognized by the business community so they know exactly where to go to and to get the support and services that they need. So those are just some different models. There are lots. We could provide other examples if you want more details about any of these, or even connect folks to people who have gone through similar processes. And I'm sure they would have great advice for you. So I think with that.
I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple questions, actually. Sure. When you were talking about they provide staff, and you were talking, I think it was the first one, the Albany County Alliance, which is a 501(c)(3). Who is they providing staff to the 501(c)(3)?
So the 501(c)(3) has their team for Advance Albany County. I think it's 3 folks. And they're not set up that way. Naturally Lewis is, and Think Dutchess is. So they're also both nonprofits. And so they, in Naturally Lewis's case, they have folks on their team who are staff to the 501(c)(3). But
is the county has staff who provide it to the 501(c)(3)?
No, the 501(c)(3) they're not county staff. They're separate. The county,
they have their own
in
staff.
These cases fund these organizations in different ways, seed funding in most of them. But yeah, the staff work for the 501(c)(3), and they help manage the different boards that are, within those entities.
Okay, so my second question is, we talked about building a brand identity. So I just wanted to put this out there. We've just developed a brand. We've been developing a brand identity for the area, which is our Western New York Wilds, which I think is a really nice, but we're talking about a different brand identity specifically for our economic development. And I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, and Western New York Wilds is a great brand for your tourism initiatives. Tourism is very intricately linked to economic development, but it is not the same thing. And so we need a kind of a brand for that hub of providing economic development services. I know branding is a horrible process to go through, though, so.
So if I may, and maybe I'm jumping the presentation, but your recommendation to the county would be to forego an internal economic development office in favor of an outside entity, and that outside entity would also incorporate tourism? Is that right?
If that is a model that we think would work here, recognizing that there's a lot of history and, that would take a lot to get into that space, but that is the recommendation that we would make at this point, yes.
Can you describe, I understand it's a separate entity, I understand it's a nonprofit. I'm looking at some of these that you had up here, and they do have boards of directors. Are those boards typically established through their county? Their county makes the appointments to their boards of directors? Is that how it works?
So I'm familiar with the Alliance Naturally Lewis because we help them go through the process. And yes, so the county in both cases has a couple board seats for the 501c3 that they get to nominate. And so then there's also representation. So in the case of Naturally Lewis, the IDA is part of this umbrella. So the IDA has its separate board, but there's one or two folks that sit both on the IDA board and the board of the EDA, the overall umbrella organization.
And their IDAs are under that umbrella as well?
For Naturally Lewis, yes, and Think Duchess, yep.
So how would you help us strategize filling? So regardless if it's in-house or if it's an outside entity, you still need that economic development head, your director.
Yes.
And we can't get a qualified candidate for an in-house department. Would there be hope that it would be easier to fill if it was under this structure, and if so, why?
Yes. Economic developers like to have a little bit of separation from the political environment because they can be more nimble. And so I do think in terms of, this is an exercise in talent attraction. If you kind of really pushed this opportunity for someone to help stand up this organization and get momentum and get things in place, and this is probably, a 2-year commitment at least, it would be, you would be able to, that would be enticing to kind of a higher level economic developer that you could do a statewide or even national search for.
Is there more flexibility for compensation in this structure?
Yes.
I'm
also not an attorney though, so.
Including commission type compensation, or
That's
that might be a Craig
sticky
question. I don't know.
one. That's I don't want to comment on that one. There have been counties that have tried that in the past in terms of like like deal-based type of arrangements, and that has not been viewed by the public in other places very well. So that's something that you definitely would want to think through.
Quick question, just going back to what Steve said. I wrote down, is this a one-person job? It really is not.
No.
Right. And so you're talking about a staff?
Yes.
Right? Okay.
You need to start with one person who can be very nimble, of course, and then be able to quickly build a team of ideally, 3-4 people based on what other systems that you want to kind of bring into this umbrella organization. So you need people that are really good at marketing, and then you need people who really understand the finance and incentive side. And then someone, the economic development executive who can be the visionary and kind of lead overall and develop all those relationships constantly. So it's different skill sets.
Can you talk a little bit about how each one of these that you talked about, how are they funded?
So Advance Albany County Alliance was funded by the county. They have a 3-year, I believe a 3-year commitment to help seed the organization. Naturally Lewis is a little bit more complex. They also have county funding. Naturally Lewis was able to, over time, they brought their chamber into the system, and so they also have some, member funds and things like that. I'm not recommending that here. I know you have some great chambers, but that is, ultimately where they decided to go because of capacity issues. I don't know as much about Think Duchess. Do you know Chautauqua?
Chautauqua, actually, just with the timing, they did their process similar to this right before the pandemic, and so they used quite a bit of their ARPA funds to be able to fund startup of the partnership. They also get, I believe, county funds, and also work with some of the philanthropic groups across the county, and so they receive funding from them as well. So a mix of public, private, and philanthropic in a lot of cases. Yeah. And those like Naturally Lewis and Think Duchess that have the IDAs, obviously there's funding there. So there's different sources for all of them.
So is it the thought that the county funded them to seed, to get them up and going for several years with the intent that this 5013C down the road would be self-standing?
I think they, for Naturally Lewis, I know that the county has committed to kind of pull it back a little bit, but still continue some funding instead of having their own economic development department. I think Advance Albany County, I think eventually wants it to be a self-standing entity. But no, I take that back because they have the ability to appoint board positions. So that's kind of the relationship there. So I think they'll continue to fund the organization and that's how they've set up that structure. But there are others, I just don't know any on the top of my head, that are completely like separate from being supported by the county government.
Can I ask another question? Brooke brought up about the board, and you mentioned that the county, I think it was for Naturally Lewis or for Albany County, has the ability to seat a couple legislators on that board. And I think Brooke was also trying to get to who seats the other members of that Economic Development Board. Is it the person that you bring in for economic development, or does this board appoint, like we do with a lot of other boards, we appoint people to all kinds of boards? Would it still have to run through the board, not a board person, but whoever sits on that board? Do you know how that happens? How they get appointed?
I don't know exactly, but I could go back and talk to them and see exactly how they do it. I know that, like I said, some there's like, depending on which organizations are within the umbrella organization, some members have dual purpose. They sit on both boards so they can see like the connections between what's happening specifically with IDA projects or LDC projects, and then what's happening kind of at a more visionary level.
I think generally if it's a board of another organization, they have their own mechanisms to their board, and then there's seats that are held open for county or for other organizations on that. So I think they have their own process because they're their own nonprofit.
Yeah. I know in Albany, the Alliance's case, we helped them go through that process. And so the county, like I said, appointed a couple, but then we really went out to the business community and, invited people to join. But after that, the process will be different. But we tried to get representatives from each of their key sectors and real estate.
And that's to try to get the politics out of it. Is
Right.
that correct?
Yes.
Which I agree with, because
That
that's
really
one
is.
of the things hindered us greatly here. Over the last few years, we actually lost a major project here, which was highly detrimental to the county future. And I know that the legislators in that county, neighboring county, and the town officials, while we were being told we couldn't do anything, were out actively working, looking for sites and helping, talking to landowners and so on. We got to get a lot more aggressive here. And what I want to see is a lot less talk and a lot more action. So whatever the best way to do that, I think is what we got to do. Thank you.
So I just want to see if this is where we're at. We have 7.5 million put away for economic development. Is it your recommendation that we look at taking that money and invest it in an outside organization and take it out of the county government and go that route?
I guess at this point, I'm asking you to consider that option. Yes. Go ahead.
Going back to the board, just quickly, do you then, like you helped them find people for their board, do you also assist that board with what their goals are, like so that they have something to go by?
Yep, we helped them with some of the kind of the background, like policy and things like that, to get focused. We also did some kind of one-on-one discussions with board members as they were coming on to make sure that they understood what the overall strategy is for the county and what their role is in that. So we did do some kind of executive type coaching for that.
Thank you.
For Albany County, yep.
Mr. Boyd has something in the back.
I think it's important to recognize the bullet points, that one of the very first bullet point that was put up there, which was seek the advice of counsel.
Yes.
Because what you're looking at potentially with setting this up, if this organization comes to be, they would establish their own bylaws and operational procedures, and they could also identify the board composition to ensure that the county does not have a majority of the board members there, so that you're not in control of that, but you're a part of that. But those are things that council will advise them on and make sure that they take care of that. And from the standpoint of, I think, Jan's question of looking at that total 7.5 million, A, we have some of that money committed already. B, it would be a board decision as to the amount of money that you wanted to put into that type of 501c3 from that standpoint, because there are opportunities and options that you may want to look at for funding projects that could easily be established out of that are going to be a countywide benefit. Some things that may not fit neatly into that. I think the beauty of looking at this particular arrangement is that you have that collaborative process from the standpoint of there are things that the county can do that the IDA can't do. There are things that the IDA can do that we can't do. And coming back to Jen's point of, looking at some of those overarching ideas of satellite positions, this is an entity that really could coordinate and focus to make sure that we have those pieces in place. There are very good things happening here. There is, through the efforts of both Keir and Craig and what we've been able to do ourselves, in spite of our arrangement, we're still making progress. And I think that's something that we need to champion and to continue to move forward. But it would appear that if this is the interest of the board, there's a lot of legwork. We can bring Camoin back in to help us with the structure and this piece, but it is a way to separate the economic development activities to be and take the politics out of it by looking at that entity of like an economic development authority that could assist with the staffing issues and would also be able to attract a top-notch person to come in and really champion the cause and continue to move us forward. So that's my unsolicited 2 cents worth, but I think that, something we need to keep in mind. So,
Deb?
So can you tell us in New York State, out of the 62 counties or 64 counties, how many are set up with a 501(c)(3)?
I will have to get back to you on that. But a lot of them are, and there are other counties who have a county, economic development director and staff, and the IDA is separate. And I live in Warren County, and so they actually have a 501(c)(3), a separate IDA, and an economic developer for the county. So there's lots of different ways to do this, but I can get back to you on I think we might have that because we actually did a survey of all the IDAs at least, so we might sort of be able to tell you that.
I'm just curious on the process. If we decide to go this route, what kind of time frame are we looking at before it's up and actually doing something?
You need a champion. You need a small group of a couple people who can move quickly and shepherd this. Getting the 501c3 set up by itself with a board can happen relatively quickly. When it comes to thinking about what other systems and organizations you want to be part of that organization, whether it's looking at the IDA or even tourism, or there's lots of other things that you could think about. That could take a couple years because you want to have conversations with all the board members and kind of bring people along, because we recognize we've been working on this process for several months to get to this point and working with the staff. So they've kind of heard this and know where we were headed. You guys are hearing this for the first time, but it's going to take some conversations. So I would say a year to 2 years to fully kind of get wherever you decide to land and what you want that organization to look like. It'll probably take about that time to get it completely set up. That was the experience in Lewis County.
Mike, do you have something?
No, I just wanted to thank Tim Boyd for his comments. And I think, the more politics we can take out of it, the better. I think it's a better PR for attracting business to the county, new business especially, and also to attracting the help we need on those boards. I just think that, we ought to set a deadline. If we're going to do it, we ought to set a deadline. And I don't, 2 years is a little long for me. I'd say no longer than a year and a half, and get those things accomplished. Thanks.
Jen?
One more question. I need a little clarification. This is totally separate from the IDA, or is it actually part of the IDA?
So it would be, the 501c3 would be, think about it as an umbrella organization and brand. And what you could do is kind of share help provide staffing to the IDA. They would have a separate board. This is just one model. There are different models out there, but this is the one that I know Lewis has. But that way you have a team of people that can help work on IDA projects, all under the kind of the overall vision of the kind of 501c3. And the IDA in Lewis County is branded Naturally Lewis, as is the overall. So there's no question, because the business doesn't care if they're working with the IDA or, who, they just need support, right? So it's all branded as kind of one thing there.
I think it would be important to get us the structure of these a little bit, so it's a little bit clearer instead of,
Absolutely.
just.
I would love
talking
to draw it all out for you on a whiteboard or something.
Just draw it on a paper and send it to us. It just would make it clearer. Thank you.
Thank you. Deb, then Carissa's got something in the back.
I want to go back to the timeline. I don't want to rush into anything. I want to take our time and make sure we're doing it the right way. But I also look at our timeline and the politics here, and we all have a year before we get crazy here for election. And I think we need to have a structure agreed upon. You may have a new board in 2025, and you're back at beginning and trying to get them on board again. So I do think there is some reason to try to get a structure at least approved, and even though we take our time to get it all put together.
Carissa?
I just want to say this has been a great experience, and we have at the back table in the back row here had a lot more time to kind of let these things sink in and brainstorm on how you might get there. It's important to note you still need an IDA. IDAs can do things that the 501c3 can't do, and vice versa. So you will still have a lot of these things, but that umbrella organization, just making sure we're on the same mission and everybody is going in the same path. And, I like the idea of getting this out of government, because this really isn't a function of government. This is something that we should have that private-public partnership in. We need the buy-in from our businesses. We need to have some independence with this. So I think this is a good model to work towards, but it is going to take time to get there, and we'll figure that out.
So I know you had this discussion with Camoin, but my knee jerk when I heard this concept was, now wait a minute, the board just got out of a contract for economic development services for the sole purpose of regaining control over that economic development vision. It hasn't worked out. We can't staff a department. We've just been kind of floundering. I think I'm very cautious about considering this personally, because we've kind of been down that road. And you can say, well, we have board representation on the IDA, we have board representation on all of our advisory committees for the most part, but we still feel oftentimes as though what our vision was as a board just kind of wanders off, and it changes into something else, and the board doesn't have control. I understand the power of the purse, and that particularly in an instance like this, we would be probably the sole funding source for this organization at the onset. And so there would be a natural inclination for that board, that new board, to work with the county to ensure that we have a shared vision. But I am concerned about that, to be honest. And I don't know if you can alleviate that concern at all by your experience with other counties, but I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, Brooke and I don't always agree on everything, but I agree with Brooke on this one.
That is some of the
Could you note that
concerns.
in a minute, sir?
Those are some of the concerns I did bring up with Camoin, and I think that's been maybe this board's experience in general with all of these other organizations that you appoint people to. We tend to just do the appointments and then not follow up with the conversations to see how those boards are working, if we're all in agreement with the strategy that they're on. And I think if you go a separate route here, I think that's important that although you're handing the football off, you need to keep in constant communication to make sure that we're all buying into the same mission. And if that's not working out, then we need to, pull back on things and get people back together on that same mission. But I think you have that problem with a lot of your boards.
Yes, and I totally agree with what she just said.
Deb, then Craig. In the back.
So I see that we as a legislator have a responsibility, and our role is to help set those goals and then provide an organization then that can implement those goals. I mean, we're not giving up anything. I mean, we should be setting those goals. We should be talking about what those goals are on the backboard there and talking about the next 5-10 years. We're not giving up that. We're trying to find a way to implement those goals. So I still see we have to play a major role in those goal settings down the road till eternity.
Eternity. Craig.
Yeah, I agree with that, as well as, I've worked with a lot of counties, and imagine most of the counties that have been successful have this kind of LDC. The most successful one is actually Genesee County. They put this in place 19 years ago. And obviously, they've done some really great things up there. Location is a little bit better, but they've done a lot of it because they had a 501(c)(3) and LDC. And the IDA, it's interesting, they have an IDA, and it's active, but you can't even find the IDA on their website. So they're a tool, and they should be a tool. They're an important tool. But I think having this economic development group that has a really good strategic plan that is revised and looked at regularly by this board is the key component in how you drive that. And I think when you do that, you're going to have an integration of a really good economic development group that can do things that the county can't do, the IDA can't do, and that's why most counties of any size have some kind of a group that's doing and leading economic development. And the people that you hire in that position that run that, I can tell you they're truly good leaders, they're great economic developers, and I think you will be able to find somebody to do that, even in a small county like Allegheny County.
I believe that organization up in Genesee County they also paid a commission, didn't they, for businesses brought in?
I don't think they do now, but they may have when they start.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just going to echo Craig's point that, what you've got the benefit at this point of, having the strategy that we just talked through, and that's got to be living and breathing, but that's the page that we're all working towards, that the 501(c)(3), that the board would be working from. And, there might be different pathways to achieve certain things in that plan, but, that's the vision, that's established. How you get there, has to be a partnership, but, you're working towards the same vision. And knowing that there's got to be flexibility in the 5-year time frame of that plan. Things are going to change, opportunities are going to come up, and you've got to be willing to take those chances. So that, I know we were only supposed to go to 11, so that is what we came to talk to the group about, just in terms of wrapping up, sort of where do we go from here. If we have the slides back up, our contact information is on there, and we would certainly welcome any feedback and conversation like that. But, we're continuing to work with staff to wrap up the strategy itself, so all of those elements that we talked through today, to have that roadmap, that plan in place, and that we will have wrapped up by the end of the year. So we're looking, at the next month and a half at putting that roadmap together. From there, we've put some ideas in front of the group in terms of considering where to go with the organizational component, and that's clearly an ongoing conversation. It's come up that we have done this before in other counties, and so we are certainly happy to continue this relationship and continue those conversations. That would be a separate piece from the strategy component that we're doing now, but it is an ongoing conversation here in the community, right? It's got to be bringing everyone along the way. Tonight, we are doing a business mixer in Alfred, inviting some of the folks that we've engaged along the way, and we'll offer them a chance to sort of update them on where we are with the plan, since they took their time and spent some time with us in July. So we'll update them on just some basics of the plan and get some additional feedback. We're actually going to do the same activity that we did with you guys with the headline, and really offer an opportunity to bring both of the chambers together. They are co-hosting it as well. So we've got about 40 to 45 businesses on the list, so it should be a good meetup there. And so we appreciate
it is in Wellsville. It's the Alfred State Campus in Wellsville,
Sorry.
so there's the confusion. But
Yes.
I only mention that because Mallory was nice enough to send the legislators invites as well if they wanted to attend. So don't go to Alfred. Go to Refinery. Is that what it's called?
Good food and culinary.
Yeah, that's right. Go to the culinary school.
Yeah.
Don't go to the what's the one in Alfred you wouldn't want to go to?
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. That starts at 3:30. 3:30 to 5:30, open house style, truly come through as you can, as your time allows. But yeah, open house style, quite informal. Tim or Carissa, anything else for the last word?
Thank you for the presentation. I mean, we're pretty excited, actually very excited about looking at this potential for strategy and looking at what the board what path the board may choose to proceed. It certainly makes sense, and I think the opportunity for us to really build upon the things that we have been able to do, again, in spite of ourselves or in spite of what folks think. There is a lot of activity that's going on, and we really want to build from that. And this is a real opportunity for us to focus on some other activities. The goals that we set upon earlier on, I think were noble efforts, but it just doesn't seem to fit. And fortunately, we are smart enough to learn from our mistakes and carry on. So we thank you for your work that you've done, appreciate that, and looking forward to this afternoon event and the next steps in how we proceed. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, we have just one other quick agenda item, and Chris has submitted an MOE. Are you ready to go on that, Chris? It's voting machines?
Yes, this one's an easy one because it's just asking for permission to go out to bid on new voting machines. It's something we've talked about for the past year and a half, and we do have a nice bid package ready to go. We just need permission to publish it.
Brumfield will move.
Thank you, and
I'll second it.
thank you, Mr. Demick. Any discussion? Jan?
Is this still planned on coming out of ARPA money funding for it?
I think, hopefully have an ARPA discussion coming forward, but yes, we do have this kind of off to the side with an estimate amount for targeted for ARPA, but we will be talking about that when we get to ARPA, and by that time, hopefully we'll have the bids back and we can look at the exact amounts.
I just have one more question. About how long did the previous machines last, and about how long do they think these will last?
I have no idea off the top
They
of my
were,
head.
they were 10-year,
Yeah.
they serviced them for 10 years. I think they're getting on years 14 now. What year was that?
09.
Yeah, so, yeah, about 13, 14 years. So, I think the life expectancy, those of you who went to some of the demos might remember it, I think they said the life expectancy is about 10 years. And because I know we discussed that, you know, if it's a known expense every 10 years that you're going to have to come up with at least $600,000, then, you know, you're figuring $60,000 a year you're putting just towards keeping your voting machines up to snuff.
Maybe when we have our ARPA discussion, I can get some background info and just have just a short little paragraph about some of those issues for that.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That's approved. All right, any old business, new business? Go to the order. Mr. Rumfeld.
Mr. Chairman, as there appears to be no other business to come before the committee of the whole today, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Motion made, is there a second? By Mr. Havey. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And we're adjourned.